that was fighting for gay rights, and people were killed.
Nobody was killed at Stonewall.
Nobody was killed.
In 2010, the second ever season of RuPaul's Drag Race began to air, revealing to the world the 12 new queens who would go on to become drag icons, while paving the way for future drag royalty. Within season 2, one of the main storylines was that of James, whose drag name on the show was Tyra Sanchez. He'd end up making it to the finale of the season, becoming the second ever winner of RuPaul's Drag Race. Yet that's where the story begins to take a dark turn. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the life and legacy of James Ross. I'll delve into key moments in his post-Drag Race career, his tumultuous relationship with the fans of the show, and how it all led up to Tyra Sanchez being a figure the World of Wonder is trying to erase from their memory. So the first topic I wanted to explore was the whole narrative of Raven was robbed. For a long time, as Drag Race gained newer fans, one of the first things that they would see talked about in the fandom was that a contestant named Raven, who competed on season 2, made it to the finale and didn't win the crown, only to return 2 years later for All Stars 1, making it again to the finale and becoming a runner-up for the second time. Raven would then become the first queen to ever place second on 2 separate seasons. James winning RuPaul's Drag Race was completely justified. If you watch season 2, you'd know that James was consistently better than Raven when it came to the challenges, considering Raven had to lip sync 2 times in a row within the first 3 episodes of the season, along with having only 2 challenge wins, while James had a total of 3. Some fans have argued that James wouldn't have had as good a track record had it not been for him receiving immunity for some challenges, as it would then save him from episodes where he didn't do very well. The show would then stop using immunity by season 6. Now, while it is true that immunity resulted in James putting less effort into certain challenges, in the end, it doesn't really matter, since he would officially make it to the season 2 finale, having never placed in the bottom 2, along with having the better track record between him and Raven. So why did the fanbase actively dislike the drag character of Tyra Sanchez? Another element that came into play was simply how widely unavailable the early seasons of Drag Race were back in the day. While today it's really easy to be able to access all seasons of Drag Race through streaming services, in the early 2010s era it was really hard to be able to find a lot of the seasons, especially season 1. Because of this, it was a lot easier and more appealing for fans to watch All Stars 1, as it was the only All-Star season in existence for many years. It is through All Stars 1 that a lot of newer fans of the show got to get acquainted with Raven. Fans have also argued that due to the way that James behaved on Drag Race, he should not have won the crown. They felt that James was constantly displaying a negative attitude towards the other queens, along with acting like a diva and being disrespectful, which is kinda weird since Raven had also displayed arguably a worse set of negative behavior throughout her run on season 2, which included her coming for Nicole Paige Brooks or Tatianna. In fact, a lot of the earlier seasons featured the queens being generally more catty to each other, so it was weird that the occasional bratty behavior that James displayed on season 2 was used to crucify him. In February 2014, World of Wonder uploaded the first episode of Fashion Photo Review featuring Raja, the winner of season 3, and Raven, the runner-up for season 2 and All Stars 1. During this time, season 6 of RuPaul's Drag Race was airing, which was the most successful season of Drag Race to date, meaning that there was thousands of new fans that were now learning about the queens of the show. The introduction of Fashion Photo Review would help many new fans who hadn't watched the older seasons to sort of warm up to both Raven and Raja. All these factors would help perpetuate the notion of Raven being the robbed queen of both season 2 and All Stars 1. This produced a divide between the marketability of the season 2 top 3 queens. Fans didn't really care too much about James, which was contrasted by Raven and Jujubee becoming fan favorites. So it was only natural the World of Wonder would begin featuring Raven on a lot more appearances in their social media projects, while paying James dust. So James was faced with a situation where he was going to have to create his own narrative. It wouldn't take long before a new opportunity arose for James to be able to show the world a more personal side of Tyra Sanchez. In July of 2012, James would announce a Kickstarter campaign where he asked fans to donate money so that he could make a documentary titled Drag Dad, which would center around the life of being a drag queen while also taking on the responsibilities of being a father. The goal of the Kickstarter was was set to $14,000 but would end up amounting over $20,000 in donations by the end of the month. However, as the months went by, there wasn't any new updates regarding the project until everyone just sort of forgot about it. The person in charge of putting the documentary together, whose name is Bjorn Floki, was giving updates about the project for the following year and a half, until December 2013, where suddenly there was no new updates regarding the completion of the Drag That documentary. It would then take 4 years before there was an official update and explanation regarding the documentary and the thousands of dollars that fans had donated to the project. In February 2016, it was officially announced that the Drag Dad documentary was cancelled and would no longer be happening. In regards to the $20,641 that had been raised by fans for the project, it was confirmed that they would not be receiving any kind of refund. It seems that throughout the 4 years, the production involved in making the documentary was desperately trying to make the documentary happen, but it was to no avail. So what happened to the $20,000 and why didn't the documentary ever reach the public eye? In the article, Bjorn offers his apology to those who supported the project, adding that the Drag That documentary first started off as a film school project. He states that in early 2012, James was a single father living in a small apartment in Atlanta with his 6-year-old son, who he was supporting out of the income that he earned performing as Tyra Sanchez. Bjorn wanted to be able to share the story with the world. It also seemed like a very good way for fans to be able to see a completely different side of James Ross, the person behind the character of Tyra Sanchez. This was a very exciting time for James. He was now going to be able to immortalize his relationship with his son through a documentary that would aim to showcase the bond between the two, while also breaking barriers on the stigma surrounding queer parents. But suddenly, things began to take a turn. It seems that right as filming had just begun, James stated he was no longer going to be able to financially support his son Jeremiah, and would end up couch surfing as he figured out how to get back on his feet. His son would then go on to live with his mother. Essentially, James was having a very rough time in his life, and it seemed that everything was falling apart. This then affected the progress of the Drag That documentary, as Jeremiah's mother, who was now in charge of the kid, had declined multiple times to be a part of the documentary, or to allow her son to be in it. All hope was then lost when James's son Jeremiah would go on to live in the other side of the country with his mother. While they were able to gather 70 hours worth of footage, it wasn't enough to create a concise storyline. It was also revealed that the $20,000 that fans had donated for the project had already been used to purchase film equipment and other expenses related to production before it became clear that they would not be able to go forward with the Drag That documentary. After fans were sent an email telling them that they would not be receiving any refund, the official website, Twitter, and Facebook for the documentary were all deleted. Moving on, James pointed out that there was a clear double standard that the fanbase had when it came to how they handled controversial queens. For instance, Sharon Needles had gained a lot of infamy within the club scene for being very problematic, with countless stories of Sharon being racially insensitive or wearing clothing that depicted Nazi symbolism. Despite this, Sharon continued to thrive in her career for almost a decade after winning season 4. It seems that a lot of her behavior was excused thanks to her brand being based on pushing boundaries and being a rebel. James continues talking about Sharon Needles, citing that she was known to use the N-word at bookings, despite being told by show promoters to quit using that word. But the fanbase wasn't really seeing that side of Sharon behind the scenes, so to them Sharon's behavior was just Sharon being Sharon. For this reason, she kept receiving a vast amount of support despite James not being given the same leeway. RuPaul's Drag Race would then start to gain a lot more exposure with every year that went by. By May 2016, the second ever RuPaul's DragCon took place at the Los Angeles Convention Center. After the first day had concluded, a photo began to circulate online, which pictured James sitting alone in his booth, with no one lined up to see him. It was a pretty sad sight to see. I mean, after all, Tyra Sanchez was one of the few winners of the franchise, given that at the time there was only 8 existing winners of Drag Race, with Bob the Drag Queen being crowned a month later. I can't imagine how that must feel, surreal to be in your booth and see that the queens next to you have fans lined up to see them while you're just sitting there alone wondering if you just wasted money on buying a booth. Although this is a truth that most Ru girls experience when doing DragCon. Not all the fans are interested in meeting the less popular queens, so most of the time there's a decent amount of Ru girls that don't profit that much from doing DragCon. Anyways, while this was happening, Roger and Raven were doing their own live show at DragCon where they were doing an episode of Fashion Photo Review and were tooting and booting the looks that they served on their seasons. At one point, Raven was looking at an outfit she wore for her first finale and began discussing how she should have won season 2 and that she was robbed twice.
Naomi and I were talking before she left for Drag Race. I said, well, go through my drag room and you can pick anything you want. And she was like, oh, I really like this. And I was like, fucking wear it, bitch. Now,
It looks
I
so
also
great on
told her, you're supposed to be coming out of a black and white movie. Tell them this is a movie about a queen that got robbed twice.
Raja then agreed with this sentiment and urged the crowd to cheer for Raven as the robbed queen.
I think you guys are actually clapping too soft. Like, clap louder. She meant what she said.
It was kind of weird that even by 2016, they were still perpetuating the notion of Raven being robbed, especially coming from another fellow winner. Nowadays, when a queen wins a season, even if fans disagree with it, it seems that the common thing among queens is for them not to discredit the win. The bitterness that Raven expresses for not winning season 2 is mirrored with the situation of Divina De Campo. Divina De Campo was the runner-up for Drag Race UK season 1. And was the fan favorite out of the top 3 finalists, but ultimately Divivian would be chosen as the winner. For the years that followed, it seemed that Divina couldn't let go of the fact that she had lost, finding ways to sort of throw shade and discredit the win of Divivian. The fact of the matter is that there really is no pleasing the fans of the show, but it seems off when queens who just lost a season try to discredit the winner. Moving on, in May 2017, James released on SoundCloud a story titled Dear Drag Race Fans, where James had a few things he wanted to say to the fandom of the show. In it, there was 3 main points that he needed to get across. The first was that people need to accept that on August 7, 2009, James was filmed winning RuPaul's Drag Race Season 2, which later aired on April 26, 2010. The second point was that fans should realize that Raven lost twice, or even 3 times if you count Naomi Smalls, with the third being that fans should stop sending him hateful messages. However, there was one queen that took issue with this, and that was Morgan McMichaels, who felt that what James had said about Raven was very disrespectful. The conflict was that Morgan and James had an upcoming gig together the following weekend at Mickey's, but shortly after the release of Dear Drag Race Fans, James got a call from the club manager stating that his gig had been cancelled, presumably because Morgan did not want to work with him. The funny part was that Raven did not care about anything that James had said, but the one making an issue out of it was Morgan McMichaels. That's when on the day of Morgan's birthday, James ended up retaliating by making a Facebook post where he announced that Morgan McMichaels had died. This obviously alarmed many people, yet it wouldn't take long before Morgan confirmed that she was in fact still alive. Tatianna then messaged James telling him he needed to delete the post, but James got upset and posted Tatiana's phone number on Instagram. Tatianna then did the same with James, but James began answering the fans' phone calls on a live video. Morgan then denied that she ever cancelled anyone's gig. According to Morgan, she did not want to work alongside James, so he told the manager to cancel Morgan's booking instead. But the manager would end up choosing to keep Morgan McMichaels over James. That same weekend, Morgan would read her own eulogy as she celebrated her own funeral at Mickey's. Later that summer, Morgan was cast on All Stars 3, which is why on the first episode, Morgan's entrance line was, "I look pretty good for a deadbeat." Moving on from the Morgan McMichaels death hoax, why did James decide to start the Dear Drag Race Fans series in the first place? Well, the third installment of Dear Drag Race Fans was called Book 1, Chapter 3, Beef. In it, James discussed his experience attending RuPaul's DragCon 2017, which he says was hell on earth because, quote, who would want to be in a building surrounded by people who hate you? Ultimately, despite both of the previous DragCons not being very nice experiences, James still decided to attend because he loved RuPaul, so he bit the bullet and showed his support for the franchise. Shortly after arriving, James was escorted along with the rest of the season 2 girls to the area of the convention where they would be doing a reunion, one that is currently available on YouTube. Once the panel began, James was seated on one of the ends of the table with the host sitting in the middle. But there was one queen that decided to arrive fashionably late, which was Raven. Once Raven arrived, the entire crowd was cheering, with the host inviting Raven to sit right next to him. James says that if it had been him to arrive late, the fans would have held it against him, unlike they did with Raven. Later on, there was a Q&A. One of the fans that was in the audience went up to the mic and asked Raven, quote, "Do you agree with people that say you were robbed twice?" There was then a huge silence, and suddenly Raven answered, "Yes." The crowd then went wild. This part was ultimately cut from the panel episode that was uploaded to World of Wonder YouTube channel. But it's pretty easy to believe given Raven's track record with constantly saying that she was robbed of winning the show. But it was kind of a gag that she did it with the winner sitting right there. It is after that moment that James thought of the idea of doing Dear Drag Race fans. He felt that Raven was being super bitter by not honoring James as the winner. Once the panel ended, James left the convention and didn't come back. About a month later, the airing of the season 9 finale took place, where Sasha Velour was crowned the new reigning queen of the franchise. That's when James, along with Jujubee, were doing an interview, and at one point they got asked about Sasha Velour. To which James responds, "Which one is that one?"
What about Sasha Velour?
Which one was that one? Which one was that one?
She's the one that won. Oh my God!
Some fans then shared the video on social media. At the same time, James made a post about geriatric performers that Raja assumed was about her. So Raja would end up commenting an eye roll emoji under one of the posts that showed James forgetting the name of the season 9 winner, Sasha Velour. And it didn't take long for James to call out Raja on Facebook, where he'd end up calling Raja a grandma, citing that her previous post had nothing to do with her. Raja would then respond with a couple paragraphs. It starts off saying that she has no personal issues with James. As for the reason for commenting an eye roll emoji was due to feeling it was a little bit petty of James to forget the name of the newest winner, and then play it off as some pretend mistake. Raja points out that she is very proud of her age, as she's been able to gain a lot of wisdom and has made several accomplishments throughout her life. She then extends an apology to James, being optimistic about the upcoming first ever New York City DragCon, adding that she's looking forward to meeting James again in person and putting their differences aside by smoking a blunt. After Raja's post, James wrote that he doesn't accept Raja's apology and will not be smoking any blunts with her. He calls Raja a fraud, as well as comparing her to Abu from Aladdin. He then points out that if Raja had an issue with him, he should have contacted James privately. In an interview with Hey Queen, James stated that Sasha Velour winning season 9 sort of validated James winning season 2, since fans were so obsessed with track record. Sasha was now considered by many to be one of the least deserving winners of the franchise. But with that also came a double standard, because when it came to Sasha's win, she had a lot more fans defending her than James did. Now if we flash forward to a year later, in March 2018, James would get himself into one of his biggest scandals, with his threats to bomb DragCon Los Angeles 2018, which was set to happen in May of that year. James had been watching All Stars 3 as it was airing, a season where Trixie Mattel would end up controversially winning the title, with the majority of the fan base feeling that the crown should have gone to Shangela. In a now deleted post, James alludes to Trixie not being all that deserving of the crown. This then prompted a response from queens like Jaremi Carey and Tatianna, who called out James for trying to invalidate Trixie's win, which led to James calling out Trixie for not controlling her fans that were now attacking him. James then shed his focus onto Jaremi Carey and Tatianna, where things started escalating when James went on a live stream to make public threats against Tatianna and Jaremi Carey, such as James saying that if fans see the bodies of Tatianna and Jaremi stretched out on the ground, he wants fans to know it was his doing.
But when you see Miss Fifi and Miss Tati ass stretched out on the mother ground, you know it was me. Yeah. I might not have physically done it, but it will be my doing. Remember that.
Subsequently, another one of the tweets that James had posted was a threat alluding to gun violence. While it was most probably just a dark joke, it was still a very serious threat to make publicly, especially with the way gun violence is like in the United States. Jaremi then wrote some tweets where he said that James's behavior was unacceptable and that he crossed the line by implying he'd shoot one of his fellow Drag Race alumni. He also tagged DragCon, demanding that they take action over what's happening. World of Wonder ended up reaching out to James through an email, where they told James that due to what was said online, he was not going to be able to be attending the upcoming DragCon, but that there was still some hope. All World of Wonder required James to do was issue a public apology, where he makes it clear that he doesn't condone violence of any kind, including other queens, and that he would never encourage anyone else to act violently. But by this point, it seemed that James wasn't in the mood for negotiations. James replied to the email citing that he had already apologized for the incident, which World of Wonder did reference in their original email, pointing out that it wasn't a clear apology and they needed him to do it again, which James refused to do, because World of Wonder doesn't understand his situation since they are more focused on appropriating the queen's lives. He then doubles down that if World of Wonder wants to ban him from DragCon, they can go ahead, along with continuing to push the narrative that, quote, Tyra Sanchez is an angry black queen. After the announcement of James being officially banned from attending the upcoming DragCon 2018, it wouldn't take long for Tatianna to enjoy the mini victory, tweeting that James has always been a nasty person even back in 2009 when they filmed the second season of Drag Race. Tatianna also alludes that it was James's behavior that caused him to no longer get bookings from club promoters. That's when things really started to take a dark turn. As James started telling his fans on social media not to go to DragCon, he then posted a link to a website which took users to a live countdown which was set to finish on the day of DragCon's opening day, along with the word boom written in capital letters. This of course suddenly elevated the situation as people were genuinely worried that maybe James is actually planning on bombing DragCon LA 2018. Things got so bad that the FBI had to get involved to investigate the threats that were being made. Although James denies that he was ever arrested for the bombing threats of RuPaul's DragCon, he also denies that he ever made any threats at all, and that instead people misunderstood what he was saying. The live countdown on his website was apparently supposed to be for a new single that he was gonna come out with titled Boom. The DragCon 2018 bomb threats would then be the last straw for James, as pretty much everyone had agreed that things had gone too far. Which brings the question, who's to blame for the behavior that James had displayed over the course of recent years? Kylie Sonique Love pointed out on an interview with Hey Queen that she thinks James's behavior is largely due to the way the fans have treated him, citing that there's a lot of people responsible for creating the monster that James ended up becoming.
You know, we created that monster that we're all afraid of now by saying that she didn't deserve this or that she's weird or misunderstood.
In October 2018, James got himself into some drama with Pandora Box. Willem and Alaska had just started their new podcast titled Race Chaser and had already gotten to reviewing season 2. They usually invite queens that were on the season to the podcast so that they can give some insider information. Originally, it seems that Alaska and Willem had invited James to be on the podcast, but James declined to be on it for reasons unknown. So Pandora Box was invited instead, but Pandora would end up telling a story about how one day the queens still competing all decided to go together to the hotel's restaurant to have dinner. But that's when Pandora accuses James of throwing his food at the waiter after they had gotten his order wrong.
The server comes over, she had ordered a burger and it came open face, and she looked at it and she said, this is Tyra, she said, "What is that? I didn't order that," and took the lettuce and tomato off and threw it at the server.
Oh man.
James then released a tweet calling out Alaska and Willem for inviting Pandora onto the show to spread lies. But Pandora benefited from having the story corroborated by other queens who were part of the season 2 cast, such as Tatianna. The next tweet James released stated that the next time he sees Pandora, it's on site, which typically means the fight. He also says that Pandora saying that story is just creating more hate for no reason. After this, James would end up flying under the radar for a pretty good while. That's when in April 2020, James announced that he had quit drag, adding that he no longer wanted the fans to address him as Tyra Sanchez. Nina Bonina Brown then made a video titled "My Thoughts on Tyra Quitting Drag," where she gave her thoughts on a lot of the issues that James had to go through with the fanbase of the show. In the video, Nina pretty much agreed with most of what James was saying, but that when it comes to the limelight, there's a certain way you need to carry yourself, noting that James doesn't communicate his message in the right way. James then rebutted to the video that Nina made by tagging Nina's Twitter and saying it's on site. Nina then responded about how James disapproved of Nina's original video. She explains that she's confused as to why James would block her on social media, despite the video she made being mostly in favor of James. Nina also calls him out for wanting attention, citing that if he didn't like queens spreading hate, then why was he reposting a picture of Raven being robbed? If you didn't know, the Raven Was Robbed cartoon first emerged back in 2017. James released it as part of his new merch, which featured the Raven Was Robbed poster. It did get some backlash when it was released, but looking back, I kinda wish I had bought one. After Nina called out James for the second time, the drama just sort of fizzled out between them. Just 2 months later, in June 2020, as the Black Lives Matters movement was still at its height, James called out Raven on Instagram, accusing her of doing blackface, adding that Raven was blackfishing by appropriating a darker skin tone. He also claimed that Raven was racist, posting a screenshot of Raven's alleged old Grindr profile from the early 2010s, where a part of the bio states, "I prefer vanilla and spice, I'll pass on the chocolate and rice." It concludes with Raven saying, quote, "It's just a preference, we all have them." This post was followed by James leaking Raven's phone number to the fans on social media. The story would again conclude and everyone just trying to move on from it. But a month after that, in July 2020, All Stars 5 was getting close to airing its season finale, where we'd find out who out of the top 3 queens was going to be inducted into the Drag Race Hall of Fame. But about a week before the finale, there was some leaked pictures that were circulating showing that Shea Coulee had won Drag Race. All of a sudden, James made a post on Instagram that spoiled the winner of All Stars 5 being Shea Coulee. James then went around to other Rue Girls Instagram posts to comment that Shea had won All Stars 5. Although I thought it was important to note that Reddit had all of this information around the same time that James began to spoil it, so we can fairly assume what his source of information was. While the social media chaos ensued, Shea Coulee reached out to James through the DMs. In it, Shea states that she truly doesn't know what the outcome of the season is going to be once the finale airs, and that she really doesn't understand why James is coming for her. Shea also praises James for his run on season 2, reassuring James that she has always been a big supporter of him. So it hurts Shea's feelings that James would do something like try to ruin the moment of the next All Stars 5 winner. But James would end up posting the picture of Shea Coulee with the crown and scepter, which prompted Shea to comment on the post saying that production films all 3 finalists winning, so a leaked screenshot doesn't prove anything. James then replies to Shea taunting her for being upset over the spoilers. That's when James seems to foreshadow an explanation by saying it will make sense in just a few days. And that's when things start to get a little weird. A couple days later, James would post a message on Instagram titled, "Mission 3 Birds, 1 Stone." The objective of the mission was to spoil the finale for the fandom to piss off the production and pay back Shea Coulee. It starts off with James calling out the fanbase of the show for their racism, and that every day since James won season 2, he's received nothing but negativity from the fans online. There was one part of his explanation that actually made a lot of sense. When he talks about the production of RuPaul's Drag Race, he points out that after he won season 2 and began to get backlash from the fans who didn't think Tyra Sanchez deserved to win, James apparently reached out to World of Wonder many times, sharing the negative experience he's been having with the racist fandom. He told World of Wonder that the only way this could be fixed would be to get him back in front of the camera for a World of Wonder projects, such as their YouTube series or Drag Race specials. That way, James would be able to showcase his true personality to the fans, which would help get more people to like him. Yet that's when the production at World of Wonder started to sort of avoid James by postponing any projects that they planned on doing together. Eventually though, after a couple years, World of Wonder reached out to James and told him that if he wanted to be more involved with future projects, he would need to move to California. And so James decided to move to California. But once he arrived, it seemed that the production began to avoid James yet again, saying that they were too busy to meet up. In fact, the only opportunities James was offered prior to moving to California was a spot as a mentor on RuPaul's Drag U Season 2. But this was done a year after Raven and Jujubee had been invited for Season 1, which made James feel as if he was an afterthought. From the perspective of James, it seemed that World of Wonder was putting more of an effort in showcasing Raven to the fandom than they were with the person who actually won the season. It felt almost like a stab in the back. He also points out that the only times World of Wonder ever made an effort to collaborate with James was when they needed to have some of the winners back on the show, which essentially meant they were sort of forced to invite him anyway. So James said that one of the reasons he spoiled the winner of All Stars 5 was so that he could get back at the production of World of Wonder, which leads us to the explanation of why James seemed to also be gunning for Shea Coulee. The truth is revealed as 2 years prior, during the 2018 threats to blow up DragCon, Shea had replied to a tweet that Monet posted of James's countdown, where she made a joke that James's career was imploding. James then says that since that day, he's been planning his revenge on Shea Coulee, waiting for the perfect moment to strike, which was now. And so eventually the All Stars 5 finale did air, and Shea Coulee was celebrated as the new inductee in the Drag Race Hall of Fame. Due to all the controversies that James has gotten himself into throughout the past decade, fans have argued that the show should crown Raven as the new winner of Season 2, given that in the pageant systems, if the winner can't fulfill their duties, then it gets passed down to the first runner-up. But the truth is that this isn't a pageant, it's a reality TV competition. James did win Season 2. It was filmed and it's just the way the story went. I think that a winner shouldn't have to actively be involved with the show or the fan base in order to keep their title. They won fair and square, and part of the prize is the longevity and future fans always knowing your name due to being part of such a prestigious group of queens. In 2022, the first ever all-winner season began to air. Yet on episode 1, as some of the winners of the franchise were making their entrance into the workroom, there was one last queen that walked in, except their face was covered by a hat, which is then revealed to be Raven. The rest of the winners are all led to believe that Raven will be competing alongside with them despite the fact that she had lost Drag Race 2 times. It then cuts to a confessional of Raven citing that she was, quote, robbed twice. While to some it just came across as a silly joke from production, to other fans it felt more like a slap in the face to the actual winner of Season 2. It was as if World of Wonder were dismissing his legacy as one of the winners of the franchise and essentially implying that Raven is in their eyes the new winner of Season 2. Throughout the years, James has put out many different apologies along with explanations for his actions, one of the first being in April 2018, shortly after the fake threats to blow up DragCon. James posted on his Instagram story where he referred to the character of Tyra in the third person, saying that he doesn't condone threats or violence of any sorts. He apologizes for not speaking up earlier for the behavior that was displayed, and he's also sorry about a lot of the opportunities that he rejected in recent months. It ends with, quote, I will do better in the future, and I sincerely apologize if I have disappointed you. Just 2 months later, in June 2018, James would make another post on Facebook where he discussed the past couple years of his life. From the moment he won Season 2, he's received nothing but hate, racial slurs, and death threats. All because fans didn't think that he deserved to win over Raven. A lot of show promoters were also really shady to James and would speak negatively about him behind his back, which damaged a lot of his reputation. He says that while he's happy for the success that Jujubee has received, he doesn't feel the same way for Raven. He also accuses Raven of using the N-word in some occasions. He also states that the hatred from the fans has damaged him. His confidence has also been diminished, and he's been pushed back into hiding in a shell. James also explains the many attempts that he made to try to change himself for the fans. even considering bleaching his skin at one point. He also wasn't surprised that shortly after the Morgan McMichaels death hoax that World of Wonder cast Morgan on All Stars 3. He calls out Tatianna and Jaremi again for getting involved in business that had nothing to do with them. In regards to the bomb threat fiasco, James denies that he ever said he was going to bomb or shoot anyone. He's also upset that World of Wonder never reached out to apologize for elevating the situation by getting the FBI involved. Apparently, law enforcement broke into his home only for James to ask if he had done anything illegal, to which it was concluded that he had not, and they left. The following weeks, there would be an investigation made into James's documents, only to reveal nothing. James felt that World of Wonder contacting the FBI was racially motivated. He also implies he's filed a lawsuit for defamation against them. Although he does reveal something interesting. He states that in the recent months before the DragCon fiasco, World of Wonder had in fact been reaching out to James to try to collaborate on some projects, such as their YouTube channel or their official podcast. But James kept declining every offer, wanting nothing to do with the show. Flash forward to about a year later, in October 2019, James released an explanation for his absence, where he points out that he desperately needed an escape so that he could calm himself down to balance everything in his life. So he's glad he took the time to do so. He then acknowledges that he's displayed some bad behavior over the past couple of years, but that he wasn't thinking through his feelings and acted out of anger and hurt. He apologizes to everyone for his online behavior in the recent years, saying, quote, "I failed you and I know I am much better than that." James then asked his fans for a second chance to prove that he is in fact the icon that they were all rooting for. Which then takes us to April 2020, where James would post a message that was written back in February of that year. In it, he states that he no longer has an interest in dressing up anymore, and that the only reason he ever became a drag queen was because he's amazing at it. He also enjoyed being able to feel like Beyonce while performing on stage. He makes a point to say that he no longer wants to be referred to as Tyra, and that his pronouns are always gonna be he, him. It concludes with James reiterating again that the drag name Tyra Sanchez has officially been retired. Nowadays, James is still active on his Facebook, and recently made these two posts where he seems to be teasing a possible return to performing in drag. If and when that happens, I hope that for the most part, we can be open-minded to see James participate in the art form again. So, in conclusion, I think that World of Wonder actively tried to distance themselves from James the moment that they realized Raven was more liked in the fandom than he was. This caused a growing number of fans of the show to never get a lot of opportunities to see a different side of James. Outside of that, James has had to deal with a pretty rough life, especially when it came to his post-Drag Race career. He's expressed many times that he does not care about the Drag Race franchise anymore, but he's also expressed time and time again that he will always be the winner of Season 2. In regards to his legacy, it's unfortunate that it's been damaged by so much controversy. But what do you guys think? Does James deserve another chance to come back? Or do you think that fans should just try to forget about James, the way the World of Wonder seems to be trying to erase his memory? Let me know in the comments. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you'd like to get more updates about my future content, you can follow me on Twitter at GreenGate22, and you can support me on Patreon. The link will be in the description. See you guys next time.